Standing in the marble lobby of the Grand Oak Country Club, clutching my designer clutch with trembling fingers, I watched my sister Emma glide across the reception hall in her $1,000 wedding dress. 15 years had passed since my family threw me out like garbage, calling me their ugly disappointment who would never amount to anything. Now I was back, a multi-millionaire tech CEO they didn't recognize, watching Emma's perfect wedding to Derek Martinez, the only boy who had ever shown me kindness in high school. When Derek approached our table and asked Emma, "You know her?" I looked directly into my sister's eyes and said, "I'm her sister." Emma's confident, radiant smile froze completely, her face draining of all color as the champagne glass slipped from her manicured fingers. The memory crashed over me like a violent wave as I watched Emma's frozen expression. 15 years ago, I had been Hannah Clark, the overweight girl with severe cystic acne covering my cheeks and forehead, thick plastic glasses that constantly slipped down my nose, and stringy brown hair that never seemed to hold any style. While Emma was the golden child with her naturally blonde hair and petite frame, I was the family embarrassment they tried to hide during social gatherings. Graduation night had started with such hope. I had earned a 3.8 GPA despite working 20 hours a week at the local grocery store to buy my own clothes and school supplies. My parents refused to spend money on what my mother called throwing good money after bad. I had been accepted to 3 state universities, including Ohio State, with partial academic scholarships. That night, I believed everything would finally change. The graduation party was held at our house, a modest 2-story colonial in suburban Dayton. Emma, then 16 and already the neighborhood beauty queen, had invited all her popular friends. My mother, Linda, wore her best dress and had spent hours preparing elaborate appetizers and decorations. My father, Robert, grilled burgers in the backyard, laughing loudly with the other parents who came to congratulate their graduating children. I remember standing awkwardly in the corner of our living room wearing the only decent dress I owned, a navy blue thrift store find that was too tight around my midsection. Emma's friend Madison, a cruel girl with platinum blonde hair and cold blue eyes, pointed at me and whispered something to the group. They all burst into laughter, their eyes fixed on my face with its constellation of angry red blemishes. "Hannah?" My mother called loudly, her voice cutting through the party chatter. "Come here for a moment." I approached nervously, hoping she wanted to introduce me to someone or share news about my college acceptance. Instead, Linda grabbed my arm roughly and pulled me to the center of the room where everyone could see and hear clearly. "Everyone, I need to address something." Linda announced, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while delivering cruelty. "Some of you have been asking about Hannah's future plans, and I think it's time we were honest about our family's situation." My stomach dropped as all conversation stopped. Every eye in the room focused on me, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, making my acne even more prominent. The truth is, we've done everything we could to help Hannah, but she just doesn't have what it takes to succeed in college. Look at her. Linda gestured toward my face and body like I was an object on display. "She can't even take care of her basic appearance or lose weight despite all our encouragement. How could she possibly handle the demands of higher education?" Emma stood near the kitchen doorway, her cell phone out, recording everything with a satisfied smirk on her perfect face. Madison and her other friends gathered closer, their expressions showing a mixture of fascination and disgust as they watched my public humiliation unfold. "We've decided that the most responsible thing is to encourage Hannah to find work immediately and learn to support herself. College would just be a waste of everyone's time and money." Linda continued, her words hitting me like physical blows. "She needs to face reality and accept her limitations." Robert nodded slowly from his position by the fireplace, his beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "Your mother's right, Hannah. We've been too soft on you making excuses. It's time you learned that not everyone gets to live their dreams. Some people are meant for different paths." The room fell into uncomfortable silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as tears began streaming down my face, making my makeup run in dark streaks. Emma zoomed in with her phone, capturing every moment of my breakdown for her social media entertainment. "Please stop recording this," I whispered, but Emma just laughed. "This is hilarious. Everyone needs to see this," Emma said loudly enough for her friends to hear. My sister actually thought she was going to college. Can you imagine her trying to fit into a dorm room? The laughter that followed was the most devastating sound I had ever heard. These people, some of whom I had known since childhood, joined in, mocking my dreams and aspirations. Mrs. Peterson from next door looked uncomfortable and quietly slipped out the back door. Mr. Johnson, my former math teacher, who had always encouraged me, stared at his feet in obvious discomfort. "I got accepted to 3 schools," I managed to say through my tears. "I have scholarships waiting." "Those letters were mistakes," Linda said dismissively. "We called the schools and explained the situation. They understood completely when we told them about your issues." That was the moment my world completely shattered. My parents had sabotaged my college acceptances, destroying my future, without even consulting me. I felt like I was drowning in the middle of my own living room, surrounded by people who should have supported me, but instead celebrated my destruction. "Furthermore," Robert added, finishing his beer and setting the bottle down with finality, "we think it would be best for everyone if you found your own place to live. You're 18 now, legally an adult. We've given you a good start in life, and now it's time for you to make your own way." "You're kicking me out?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We're encouraging your independence," Linda corrected with false kindness. "We've prepared an envelope with $200 to help you get started. That's more than most parents would do." Emma stepped forward, still recording, and handed me a white envelope with obvious satisfaction. "Don't say we never did anything for you." I took the envelope with shaking hands, knowing that $200 wouldn't even cover a security deposit on the cheapest apartment in town. Looking around the room one last time, I saw faces that ranged from amused to uncomfortable, but not a single person spoke up in my defense. "I'll pack my things," I whispered. "We already did that for you," Robert said, pointing toward the front door where my old duffel bag sat waiting. "Just the essentials. You won't need much to get started." As I walked toward the door carrying my entire life in one small bag, Emma called out one final humiliation. "Don't forget to tag me when you post about your new life," she said sweetly. "I want to make sure all my friends can follow your journey." The last thing I heard before stepping into the night was Linda telling the remaining guests, "We really tried our best with her, but sometimes you have to accept that people have limitations. We're just grateful that Emma turned out so well." Standing in that wedding reception 15 years later, watching Emma's frozen expression, I realized that every cruel word, every moment of humiliation, and every night I had cried myself to sleep in that hostel had led me to this exact moment of reckoning. The first 3 months in San Francisco nearly broke me completely. I lived in a rundown hostel in the Mission District, sharing a room with 5 other women in varying states of desperation. My $200 lasted exactly 9 days, covering the hostel fee and basic food. After that, survival became my only focus. I found work cleaning office buildings at night starting at 11 p.m. and finishing at 6 a.m. for minimum wage. During the day, I worked at a coffee shop near Union Square, making lattes for tech workers who barely acknowledged my existence. My third job was weekend housekeeping for wealthy families in Pacific Heights, where I cleaned bathrooms and kitchens bigger than most people's entire homes. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. I caught naps on the bus between jobs in the coffee shop during slow periods, and in the hostel whenever my roommates weren't fighting or playing loud music. My acne worsened from stress and poor nutrition. My weight fluctuated wildly as I alternated between eating nothing and binging on cheap fast food, and my clothes were donated items from charity organizations. But everything changed the day I discovered the public library on Fulton Street. Between my morning coffee shift and evening cleaning job, I had 3 hours to kill and nowhere to go. The library was warm, quiet, and free. I initially just planned to sleep in one of the comfortable chairs, but something drew me to the computer section. I had never owned a computer growing up. My parents bought Emma a laptop for her 16th birthday, but told me I could use the family desktop if I needed it for school, which meant I rarely got access since Emma monopolized it for social media and shopping. Now sitting in front of a public computer terminal, I felt intimidated and curious at the same time. An elderly man with kind brown eyes and graying beard noticed my confusion as I stared at the login screen. He introduced himself as Walter Chen, a retired software engineer who volunteered at the library teaching basic computer skills to anyone who wanted to learn. "First time using one of these?" Walter asked, gently pulling up a chair beside me. I nodded, embarrassed. I never really had the chance to learn. "Everyone starts somewhere," Walter said with genuine warmth. "Would you like me to show you the basics?" That first lesson changed the trajectory of my entire life. Walter taught me about web browsers, email, and basic internet navigation. But what captured my imagination was when he showed me a simple website and explained that everything I was seeing had been created using something called code. "You mean someone wrote instructions that told the computer how to make this page?" I asked, fascinated. "Exactly," Walter smiled. "And anyone can learn to write those instructions. It's like learning a new language, except instead of talking to people, you're talking to machines." I started spending every free moment at the library working through online coding tutorials and practicing basic programming concepts. Walter met with me twice a week, patiently explaining concepts I didn't understand and encouraging me when I felt overwhelmed. He never asked about my living situation or why I looked exhausted, but sometimes he brought me sandwiches or coffee, claiming he had bought too much food. Within 6 months, I had learned basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Walter helped me create my first simple website, a personal portfolio, showcasing small projects I had built while learning. It wasn't much, but seeing something I had created appear on a computer screen felt like magic. "You have real talent for this," Walter told me after reviewing a particularly complex project I had completed. "Have you considered taking formal classes?" I explained my financial situation and lack of traditional education. Walter listened without judgment, then made a suggestion that changed everything. "The community college has excellent computer science courses, and they offer payment plans. You could start with one class and see how you feel." I enrolled in Introduction to Programming at City College of San Francisco, paying for it with money saved from eating nothing but ramen noodles for 2 months. The professor, Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, was a former Silicon Valley engineer who had left corporate life to teach. She was demanding but fair, pushing students to think critically about problem solving and code efficiency. My first assignment was to create a simple calculator program. I spent 30 hours on what should have been a 3-hour project, testing every possible scenario and adding features that weren't required. When Dr. Rodriguez returned our graded assignments, she asked me to stay after class. "Hannah, I need to ask you something," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling up my code on her laptop. "Have you programmed before?" "Only what I taught myself at the library." I replied nervously, wondering if I had somehow plagiarized without realizing it. "This is exceptional work for a beginner. The logic is clean, the documentation is thorough, and you've anticipated edge cases that most students don't consider until their 3rd semester." She looked at me carefully, taking in my thrift store clothes and tired eyes. "Are you working while taking classes?" I explained my 3 jobs and living situation. Dr. Rodriguez listened intently, then made an offer that seemed too good to be true. "I run a small web development business on the side, mostly websites for local nonprofits and small businesses. I need someone to help with basic coding tasks. The pay isn't much, but it's better than minimum wage, and you'd gain real experience. Interested?" Working for Dr. Rodriguez introduced me to professional web development and client management. I learned about project timelines, user experience design, and professional communication. More importantly, I started building a portfolio of real work that demonstrated my growing skills. Meanwhile, I was transforming physically and emotionally. The stress of constant survival had initially worsened my appearance, but as my situation stabilized, I began taking better care of myself. I found a dermatologist who offered sliding scale fees for low-income patients and finally got proper treatment for my acne. Contact lenses replaced my thick glasses. I started buying healthier food and lost 30 pounds through a combination of better nutrition and walking everywhere to save bus fare. But the most significant change was internal. For the first time in my life, I was succeeding at something that mattered. Each solved programming problem, each satisfied client, and each positive grade built my confidence in ways I had never experienced. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing. It was during my second semester that I made a discovery that shattered any remaining illusions about my family. Dr. Rodriguez had helped me apply for financial aid, and during the process, we discovered that my parents had never canceled my college acceptance letters. In fact, they had been required to provide financial information for my aid applications, which meant they knew exactly which schools had accepted me and how much scholarship money I had been offered. The revelation was devastating and liberating simultaneously. They hadn't just kicked me out or failed to support my dreams, they had actively sabotaged them. The total value of the scholarships I had lost was over $50,000. But the final blow came when I ran into Jamie Morrison, a girl from my high school class, at a coffee shop in the Castro. Jamie had moved to San Francisco for college and recognized me despite my transformation. Hannah Clark. "Oh my gosh, I almost didn't recognize you. You look amazing," Jamie said enthusiastically. We chatted for a few minutes about our lives in the city, and then Jamie mentioned something that stopped my heart. "You know, I always thought it was weird how your parents used your college fund to pay for Emma's plastic surgery right after graduation. Like everyone knew you were the smart one who deserved to go to college, but Emma got the nose job and boob job instead. My mom was so mad about it, she stopped talking to your mom for like 6 months." The room started spinning as Jamie's words sank in. Not only had my parents prevented me from going to college, but they had taken the money saved for my education and spent it on cosmetic surgery for my sister. The nose job that made Emma's already pretty face perfect. The breast augmentation that completed her transformation into the neighborhood beauty queen. They had literally stolen my future and used it to enhance Emma's already privileged life. "I probably shouldn't have said anything," Jamie said, noticing my pale complexion. "I just assumed you knew." That night, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I would never contact my family again. I would never seek their approval, their acknowledgement, or their love. Instead, I would channel every ounce of pain, anger, and betrayal into building a life so successful that their rejection would become irrelevant. I had no idea that 15 years later, I would be standing in a luxury wedding reception, watching my sister's face freeze in recognition as her perfect world began to crumble. By my third year in San Francisco, I had moved from the hostel to a tiny studio apartment in the Sunset District, and from Dr. Rodriguez's part-time assistant to a full-time junior developer at a small startup called Innovate Tech. The company specialized in productivity software for small businesses, and I had caught the attention of the founder, Marcus Thompson, with a workflow automation tool I had built as a class project. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need," Marcus had told me during my interview reviewing the code I had written to streamline inventory management for local restaurants. "You understand that good software solves real problems for real people." Marcus was a former Google engineer who had left the corporate world to build more meaningful technology. He was demanding but supportive, pushing me to think bigger while providing the mentorship I had never received from family. Under his guidance, I learned advanced programming languages, database design, and user interface development. My breakthrough came during a particularly frustrating week when I was juggling multiple client projects and struggling to keep track of deadlines, communications, and revisions. I found myself switching between dozens of different applications just to manage my workflow: email for communication, spreadsheets for project tracking, calendars for scheduling, and various other tools for file sharing and collaboration. There has to be a better way to integrate all of this. I complained to Marcus during our weekly one-on-one meeting. So build it, he challenged. What would the perfect productivity solution look like? I spent the next 3 months working nights and weekends to create what would eventually become TaskFlow, an integrated productivity platform that combined project management, team communication, file sharing, and automated workflow optimization in a single intuitive interface. The key innovation was an artificial intelligence component that learned user patterns and proactively suggested optimizations to improve efficiency. When I demonstrated the prototype to Marcus, his reaction exceeded my wildest expectations. "Hannah, this is revolutionary. You've solved the fundamental problem that every knowledge worker faces: tool fragmentation and context switching. This could change everything." Marcus helped me refine TaskFlow and develop a business plan. We started by offering it to Innovate Tech's existing clients as a beta test, and the response was overwhelming. Small businesses that had been struggling to coordinate their operations suddenly had a unified platform that made them dramatically more efficient. Word spread quickly through Silicon Valley's tight-knit community. Within 6 months, we had 300 paying customers and a waiting list of over 2,000. Venture capital firms started calling, interested in funding our expansion. The first major investment offer came from Meridian Capital, a prestigious firm known for identifying breakthrough technologies early. Their senior partner, Jennifer Walsh, flew in from New York specifically to meet with me. In 20 years of evaluating startups, I've rarely seen a product with this much immediate market demand, Jennifer told me over dinner at an expensive restaurant in Soma. You've created something that every business needs, but no one else has been able to deliver effectively. Meridian offered $5 million for a 30% stake in the company, valuing TaskFlow at over $16 million. For someone who had been kicked out of her family home with $200 just 4 years earlier, the numbers seemed surreal. But Marcus encouraged me to think even bigger. Jennifer's offer proves the concept, but I think we should hold out for a strategic acquisition, he advised. TaskFlow isn't just a product, it's a platform that could integrate with existing enterprise software ecosystems. He was right. 3 months later, Microsoft approached us with an acquisition offer that made the Meridian investment look modest. They wanted to integrate TaskFlow into their Office ecosystem and were willing to pay $120 million for the company. The negotiation process was intense and educational. Microsoft's team was impressed not just with TaskFlow's functionality, but with the clean, scalable code architecture I had built. They offered me a position as Director of Productivity Innovation, leading a team of 30 engineers to expand TaskFlow into a comprehensive enterprise solution. The closing day was surreal. I sat in a conference room in Microsoft's Seattle headquarters, signing documents that would make me personally worth over $20 million after taxes and Marcus's share. At 31 years old, I had gone from cleaning office buildings to directing product strategy for one of the world's largest technology companies. But success brought unexpected challenges along with financial security. Media attention was intense and often uncomfortable. TechCrunch published a feature story about my background titled "From Homeless to Hardware: The Hannah Sullivan Success Story." Forbes included me in their 30 Under 30 list. I was invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity. The attention forced me to develop a public persona that was confident and inspiring while protecting my private emotional journey. I learned to tell sanitized versions of my story that focused on determination and innovation, rather than family betrayal and homelessness. Most interviewers wanted the feel-good narrative about pulling myself up by my bootstraps, not the darker truth about parents who stole their daughter's future. I bought a penthouse apartment in Soma with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I hired a personal trainer and nutritionist, transforming my body into something I had never imagined possible. I invested in a complete wardrobe of designer clothes and had my teeth professionally whitened and straightened. The girl who had been called ugly and worthless was gone, replaced by a confident executive who commanded respect in boardrooms and conference calls. But despite all the external changes, I still carried the emotional scars of my family's rejection. Late at night, alone in my beautiful apartment, I sometimes found myself wondering what they thought of my success. Did they know who Hannah Sullivan was? Did they connect the tech executive featured in business magazines with the daughter they had discarded? I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was more complicated. The answer came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 5 years after the Microsoft acquisition. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when my assistant knocked on my door with an unusual expression. "Hannah, you have a personal call. The woman says she's your mother and it's urgent." My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to any member of my family since that devastating graduation night, and they had no idea how to reach me professionally. How had Linda gotten my direct number? Did she say what she wanted? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Something about a wedding invitation that got returned to sender and wanting to make sure you received important family news. I took the call with trembling hands. "Hannah, sweetheart, is that really you?" Linda's voice was exactly the same, but the tone was completely different. Where once there had been dismissive coldness, now I heard forced warmth and barely concealed excitement. "Hello, Linda," I replied deliberately, using her first name rather than Mom. "Oh, honey, we've been trying to find you for years. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished. We saw you in that magazine article and we just couldn't believe it. Our little Hannah running a whole company." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. After 7 years of complete silence, they had tracked me down within months of my first major media coverage. "What do you want?" I asked directly. "Well, Emma's getting married next month to the most wonderful man, Derek Martinez. You might remember him from high school. The wedding is going to be absolutely beautiful at the Grand Oak Country Club. We sent you an invitation to your old address, but of course, it came back." Emma was marrying Derek Martinez. Derek, who had been the only person in high school to treat me with basic kindness. Derek, who had asked me to be his partner for chemistry lab when no one else would. Derek, who had given me his notes when I missed school for work and never made me feel like a charity case. "We would love for you to be there," Linda continued. "It would mean so much to Emma to have her sister at her wedding. Family is so important and we've missed you terribly." I listened to her lies with a mixture of anger and curiosity. After everything they had done, they actually expected me to play along with this revisionist history, where they were loving parents who had simply lost touch with their successful daughter. But an idea was forming in my mind, a way to close this chapter of my life definitively, while seeing for myself who Derek had become and whether he knew the truth about his bride's family. "Send me the details," I told Linda. "I'll see if I can make it." "Oh, wonderful, Emma will be so excited. And Hannah, we really should sit down and catch up properly. There's so much to talk about." After ending the call, I sat in my office looking out at the San Francisco skyline and made a decision that would bring me full circle. I would attend Emma's wedding not as the broken 18-year-old they had destroyed, but as the successful woman I had become despite their sabotage. It was time to face my past with the power and confidence I had built from its ashes. The Grand Oak Country Club sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds in suburban Columbus, about an hour drive from my childhood home in Dayton. I had flown in from San Francisco the night before and checked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown under my professional name, Hannah Sullivan. The wedding invitation had been addressed to Hannah Clark, my maiden name, so I registered for the reception using that identity to avoid premature recognition. Standing in the marble and crystal lobby on Saturday afternoon, I felt like I was preparing for the most important performance of my life. My stylist in San Francisco had helped me choose the perfect ensemble, a sophisticated navy blue dress by Carolina Herrera. that hugged my transformed figure, elegantly paired with understated diamond jewelry and Italian leather heels. My hair was professionally styled in soft waves that framed my face, and my makeup was flawless but natural. I looked nothing like the overweight, acne-covered teenager who had left this town in shame 7 years ago. The country club buzzed with pre-wedding activity as guests arrived for the 4 o'clock ceremony. I recognized several faces from my high school years, all older now, but still carrying themselves with the same comfortable confidence that came from never having their world completely shattered. They glanced at me with polite curiosity, clearly trying to place my familiar but transformed appearance. Emma's ceremony was held in the club's rose garden with white chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing an elaborate altar decorated with thousands of white peonies and roses. A string quartet played classical music as guests found their seats. I chose a spot in the back row, partially hidden behind a decorative pillar, where I could observe without being easily spotted by my parents or other family members. Robert appeared first, escorting Linda down the aisle to their seats in the front row. My father had gained significant weight and lost most of his hair, giving him a tired, defeated appearance that contrasted sharply with his confident demeanor from my youth. Linda had clearly invested heavily in maintaining her appearance, but the result was artificial and strained, rather than youthful. Her face showed the telltale signs of excessive cosmetic procedures, and her blonde hair was obviously colored and styled to hide gray roots. They looked smaller, somehow diminished by time and choices that had clearly not brought them the happiness they had expected. Derek entered next with his groomsmen, and my breath caught in my throat. He had grown into his tall frame beautifully, with broad shoulders and an easy smile that hadn't changed since high school. His dark hair was slightly silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance, and he moved with the confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. But there was something in his expression that troubled me. Even from a distance, I could see tension around his eyes and a forced quality to his smile as he greeted guests and posed for the photographer. This didn't look like a man celebrating the happiest day of his life. When the bridal march began, all heads turned toward the garden entrance. Emma appeared in a dress that must have cost more than most people's cars, an elaborate creation of silk lace and crystal beading that transformed her into something between a princess and a wedding cake decoration. She was undeniably beautiful, but there was something brittle about her perfection, as if too much pressure might cause her to shatter. As she walked down the aisle on Robert's arm, her smile was radiant, but rigid, never wavering even when she stumbled slightly on her elaborate train. I noticed Derek's expression as he watched his bride approach, and what I saw there was not joy or love, but something closer to resignation. The ceremony itself was traditional and lengthy, filled with readings about love commitment and building a life together. I found myself studying Derek's face throughout, watching for genuine emotion. When they exchanged vows, Emma's voice rang out clearly and confidently, but Derek's responses seemed rehearsed and mechanical. During the Unity candle lighting, I caught a moment that confirmed my suspicions. Emma whispered something to Derek that made his jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. Whatever she said, it wasn't sweet encouragement. Derek's smile never faltered, but I saw his hands clench briefly before he steadied the candle. The reception began with cocktails on the club's terrace overlooking the 18th hole. I mingled, carefully introducing myself to strangers as Hannah Clark, an old friend from high school who had moved to California for work. Most people accepted this explanation without much interest, focused on their own conversations and the open bar. I positioned myself near enough to the wedding party to observe their interactions, but far enough away to avoid immediate recognition by family members. Emma held court like a queen, accepting congratulations and compliments with practiced grace. She had clearly perfected the art of being the center of attention, but I noticed how she monitored Derek, constantly touching his arm possessively whenever other women spoke to him. Derek, for his part, seemed to be going through the motions of celebration. He smiled appropriately, thanked guests for coming, and played the role of happy groom, but there was an emptiness in his eyes that hadn't been there in high school. The confident, kind boy I remembered had been replaced by a man who seemed trapped in his own life. During dinner, I found myself seated at a table with Derek's college friends and their spouses. The conversation naturally turned to how the bride and groom had met and their relationship history. "Derek's been talking about settling down for years," explained Brad, his former roommate from Ohio State. "We were starting to think he'd never find someone who met his impossible standards." "What kind of standards?" asked Brad's wife Sarah with obvious curiosity. "He always said he wanted someone genuine, someone real, not just pretty. He used to tell us about this girl from high school who was incredibly smart and kind, said she was the standard he measured everyone against." My heart skipped a beat as I realized Derek might be referring to me. "What happened to her?" Sarah continued. "No one knows," Brad replied with a shrug. "She just disappeared after graduation. Derek tried to find her for years, even hired a private investigator at one point. He was convinced something bad had happened to her because she was supposed to go to college but never showed up anywhere." I felt tears prick at my eyes as I understood that Derek had genuinely cared enough to search for me. While my family was telling people I was mentally unstable and dangerous, Derek was trying to find me because he was worried about my well-being. "So how did he end up with Emma?" Sarah asked. Brad's expression grew more guarded. "They reconnected at their 10-year high school reunion 3 years ago. Emma convinced him that his mystery girl had probably just moved on with her life and didn't want to be found. She was very persistent about dating him, and eventually he gave up searching." The pieces were falling into place. Emma had actively pursued Derek while knowing he was in love with someone else, someone he didn't realize was her own sister. She had built her relationship with him on the foundation of his loss and longing for me. As dessert was being served, I excused myself and moved closer to the head table where Emma and Derek sat with their wedding party. Emma was in her element, laughing loudly at jokes and posing for countless photos. But every few minutes she leaned over to whisper something in Derek's ear, and each time his smile became more strained. I was close enough to overhear when Derek's mother, Patricia, approached their table to express her joy about gaining such a wonderful daughter-in-law. "Patricia, I'm so glad we're finally family," Emma gushed, standing to embrace her new mother-in-law. "I hope Derek has told you all the wonderful things I've shared about my background." "He mentioned that you've had some difficult family situations," Patricia replied kindly. "I think it's admirable how you've overcome challenges." Emma's expression shifted to practiced sadness. "Yes, it's been hard. My older sister Hannah was quite troubled, unfortunately. She struggled with mental health issues and became somewhat dangerous to be around. My parents tried everything to help her, but eventually we had to make the difficult decision to cut contact for everyone's safety." I felt the blood drain from my face as I heard Emma spinning the same lies my mother had told Derek's family years earlier. "That must have been incredibly painful for your family," Patricia said with genuine sympathy. "It was devastating." Emma continued, her voice heavy with fake emotion. "She was so intelligent, but the mental illness just took over. She became paranoid and accusatory, making up stories about us stealing from her and sabotaging her future. It broke my parents' hearts, but they had to protect me and themselves." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but didn't contradict Emma's narrative. I wondered how much of this fiction he believed and how much he simply accepted to maintain peace. "We still pray for her every day," Emma concluded with practiced sincerity. "Wherever she is, I hope she's found the help she needs." Patricia squeezed Emma's hand supportively. "You're a strong woman to have survived such trauma and still be able to love and trust. Derek is lucky to have found someone with such resilience." I had heard enough. Emma had not only stolen my life and my family, but she was now using my destruction as a sympathy narrative to bond with her new in-laws. She had turned my pain into her origin story, making herself the brave survivor of my supposed madness. It was time to introduce myself properly and see how long her sympathetic smile would last when faced with the reality of her lies. I approached the head table with measured steps, my heart pounding, but my exterior calm and confident. Emma was laughing at something Derek's best man had whispered to her, her head thrown back in practiced delight when I appeared at her elbow. "Excuse me," I said politely, my voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. I wanted to congratulate the beautiful bride. Emma turned toward me with her professional wedding smile, the one she had been wearing for every stranger who approached their table throughout the evening. Her blue eyes met mine without recognition, taking in my elegant appearance and clearly categorizing me as another well-wisher to charm briefly before dismissing. "Thank you so much," Emma replied warmly, extending her manicured hand toward me. "I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Emma, obviously, and this is my husband, Derek." The word husband carried a subtle, possessive emphasis, a gentle warning to any attractive woman who might linger too long in Derek's vicinity. "Hannah," I replied, simply accepting her handshake and noting how her grip remained firm and confident. "Hannah Clark. We actually knew each other a long time ago." I watched Emma's face carefully as she processed my name. For a moment, nothing changed in her expression as her mind searched through years of acquaintances and casual friendships. Then her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as recognition began to dawn, but she clearly couldn't reconcile the sophisticated woman before her with her memories of her overweight, acne-covered sister. "Hannah Clark." Emma repeated slowly, her smile becoming slightly more forced. "That name sounds familiar. Did we go to school together?" "Jefferson High." I confirmed, maintaining eye contact. "I was in your sister's class, actually. Class of 2008. Emma's grip on her champagne flute tightened almost imperceptibly. The mention of her sister had triggered something, but she was still struggling to connect the dots between the elegant stranger and the broken girl who had fled her family's house with a duffel bag 15 years earlier. "Oh, you knew Hannah," Emma said carefully, her media-trained smile never wavering even as wariness crept into her voice. "My older sister. We haven't seen her in quite some time." Derek, who had been politely listening to our exchange while reviewing seating charts with the wedding coordinator, suddenly looked up with sharp attention at the mention of my name. "Hannah Clark." Derek said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and something that sounded like hope. "From Jefferson High, I remember a Hannah Clark from our chemistry class." I turned to face Derek fully for the first time since approaching their table and watched his expression transform as he truly saw me. Recognition flickered in his dark eyes, followed by confusion, then growing amazement as he processed the impossible reality of who was standing before him. "Derek," I said softly, allowing genuine warmth to enter my voice for the first time that evening. "It's good to see you again." Emma's head snapped between Derek and me as she registered the familiarity in our exchange. Her professional composure began to crack around the edges as she realized that her husband was looking at me with an intensity that had been absent from his face all evening. "You two know each other?" Emma asked, her voice climbing slightly in pitch, despite her attempts to maintain control. "Hannah was my lab partner in AP chemistry," Derek explained, never taking his eyes off my face. "She was brilliant, could solve complex equations in her head, while the rest of us were still figuring out how to balance the basic formulas." A flush of pleasure warmed my cheeks at the genuine admiration in Derek's voice. Even after all these years, he remembered me as someone worthy of respect rather than pity. "She just disappeared after graduation." Derek continued, his voice carrying old pain. "I tried to find her because I was worried something might have happened. No one seemed to know where she had gone." Emma's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She was beginning to understand the catastrophic implications of this reunion, but she was trapped by her own lies and the public setting of her wedding reception. "Oh," Emma said weakly, her brain clearly racing to find a way to control this rapidly deteriorating situation. "Oh my, this is quite a surprise." I could see her calculating desperately, trying to figure out how much Derek knew about our family situation and how much damage my presence might cause to her carefully constructed narrative. Derek leaned forward in his chair, his attention completely focused on me in a way that made Emma's jaw clench with obvious jealousy. "Hannah, where have you been all these years? I looked everywhere. I even called Ohio State because someone said you'd been accepted there, but they said you never enrolled." "I moved to California," I replied simply. "San Francisco. I've been working in technology." "Technology," Derek repeated with impressed surprise. "That makes perfect sense. You always understood systems and logic better than anyone I knew." Emma's breathing had become shallow as she watched her husband light up while talking to me in a way he clearly hadn't done with her in months or possibly years. Every word of genuine enthusiasm Derek directed toward me was a blow to her carefully maintained position as the center of his universe. "This is just so unexpected," Emma interjected, forcing brightness into her voice as she attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Hannah, I had no idea you were in touch with Derek." "We weren't," I clarified. "This is the first time I've seen him since high school." Derek's face fell slightly. "So you didn't keep in touch with anyone from Jefferson?" "No," I said simply. "I lost contact with everyone when I left town." Emma seized on this opening like a lifeline. "Yes, Hannah had some difficult times after graduation. Mental health struggles, you know. It was very hard on our whole family." I watched Derek's expression change as Emma fed him the same lies she had been telling his mother earlier. His initial joy at seeing me dimmed as concern and confusion took its place. "Mental health struggles?" Derek asked, looking between Emma and me with obvious confusion. "Hannah, you seemed fine in school, more than fine, actually. You were one of the most grounded people I knew." Emma's smile had become brittle and desperate. "People can hide their struggles very well, Derek. Hannah became quite paranoid after graduation, making accusations against our family, claiming we had done terrible things to her. It was heartbreaking." I felt a familiar rage building in my chest as Emma continued to poison Derek's perception of me with her carefully crafted lies. But I forced myself to remain calm and let her continue digging her own grave. "We tried everything to help her." Emma continued, her voice taking on the same fake sympathy she had used with Derek's mother. "But eventually she became so unstable that we had to protect ourselves. It was the most difficult decision my parents ever made." Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable as Emma painted me as a mentally ill family member who had needed to be cut off for everyone's safety. I could see him struggling to reconcile his memories of the intelligent, kind girl from chemistry class with Emma's portrayal of a dangerous person who made paranoid accusations. That must have been very difficult for everyone involved. Derek said carefully, clearly not wanting to challenge his new wife's narrative, but equally uncomfortable with accepting it completely. Emma nodded sadly. "It was devastating. But sometimes you have to accept that you can't save everyone, even family members you love." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I realized Emma had been telling this story for years. She had turned my destruction into her personal tragedy, making herself the long-suffering sister who had been forced to make difficult choices for her own protection. It was time to introduce some facts into Emma's fiction. "Emma," I said calmly, my voice cutting through her emotional performance like a blade through silk. "Do you know her?" Derek turned to look at Emma questioningly as the blood drained completely from her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out as she realized the trap I had just set. The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. Everyone at nearby tables had noticed the sudden tension and was watching our exchange with growing fascination. Emma's frozen expression told the entire story to anyone paying attention. Derek looked from Emma's pale, shocked face to my calm, expectant one, and I watched understanding begin to dawn in his intelligent eyes. "You know her," Derek repeated slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that I had never heard before. "Emma, do you know Hannah?" Emma's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her perfect wedding makeup unable to hide the panic in her eyes. Her smile had completely disappeared, replaced by the expression of someone whose entire world was about to collapse. And in that moment of frozen silence, I realized that Emma had never told Derek the most basic fact about our relationship. In 3 years of dating and engagement, she had somehow never mentioned that the Hannah Clark he had been searching for was her own sister. The lies were so much deeper than I had imagined. Emma's champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor, sending crystal shards skittering across the reception area and drawing attention from every nearby table. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held her frozen, and she began speaking rapidly, desperately, trying to regain control of the narrative that was unraveling around her. "Derek, sweetheart, I can explain." Emma said, her voice climbing to a pitch that carried across the reception hall. "This is all very complicated family history that I didn't want to burden you with on our wedding day." Derek's face had transformed from confusion to something approaching shock as the implications of the situation became clear. He stood slowly from his chair, his 6-foot frame giving him a commanding presence that made nearby guests step back instinctively. "Emma." Derek said, his voice deadly quiet in contrast to her rising panic. "Is Hannah your sister?" "Well, technically yes, but you have to understand the circumstances," Emma stammered, reaching for Derek's arm in a gesture that was equal parts plea and desperation. "She's been estranged from our family for 15 years because of her mental health issues. I was protecting you from this drama." "Protecting me?" Derek's voice carried a dangerous edge that made Emma flinch. "I've been searching for Hannah since graduation. I've told you countless times about the girl I cared about who disappeared. You knew exactly who I was talking about, and you never said a word." The color drained completely from Emma's face as she realized how catastrophic her deception had become. Around us, wedding guests had stopped their conversations to watch the drama unfolding at the head table with fascination and growing alarm. "Derek, please not here," Emma whispered urgently, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes focused on their table. "We can discuss this privately later." But Derek was no longer listening to his wife. His attention had turned completely to me, and his expression was a mixture of joy, confusion, and growing anger as he began to understand the magnitude of Emma's manipulation. "Hannah." Derek said, his voice softening as he addressed me directly. "Tell me the truth. What really happened after graduation? Why did you disappear?" I looked at Emma's terrified face, then at Derek's earnest expression, and made a decision that would shatter their marriage irrevocably. "My parents kicked me out the night of graduation," I said simply, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence that had fallen over our section of the reception. "They told me I was too ugly and stupid for college, spent my college fund on Emma's plastic surgery, and gave me $200 to leave town and never come back." Derek's face went through a series of expressions as he processed this information, settling finally on cold fury as he turned back to Emma. "Is that true?" Derek demanded. Emma's carefully practiced composure completely crumbled as she realized there was no way to spin this revelation in her favor. "That's not how it happened," Emma said desperately. "You're only hearing one side of the story. Hannah was making accusations causing problems for everyone. My parents did what they thought was best for the whole family. They used your college fund for plastic surgery," Derek asked me, ignoring Emma's protests completely. $50,000, I confirmed, for Emma's nose job and breast augmentation. Derek's face darkened as he absorbed this information. Several guests had moved closer to our table, drawn by the intensity of the conversation and Emma's obvious distress. "And you've known all along that Hannah was the person I was searching for." Derek continued, his voice growing louder despite Emma's desperate gestures for him to lower it. "Derek, please." Emma begged, tears beginning to stream down her face and destroy her professionally applied makeup. "This is our wedding day. Can't we discuss this later?" "Our wedding day," Derek repeated with bitter irony. "The wedding where you invited Hannah without telling me who she was planning to, what watched me suffer through seeing her without knowing the truth." "I didn't invite her," Emma said quickly. "My mother did. I had no idea she was coming." But you knew exactly who she was the moment she introduced herself, Derek shot back. You've been lying to me for 3 years about the most important relationship in my life. The situation was spiraling beyond Emma's ability to control, and her panic was becoming obvious to everyone within hearing distance. Wedding guests had formed a loose circle around our table, their expressions ranging from fascination to horror, as they watched the bride's perfect day disintegrate in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," a smooth voice interrupted the chaos, "what seems to be the commotion here?" I turned to see a distinguished man in an expensive suit approaching our table with obvious concern. He was tall and silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention and solving problems. "Richard Blackstone," the man said, extending his hand toward Derek. "I'm here with the Meridian Group. We're investors in several technology companies, and I couldn't help but notice the young lady who bears a striking resemblance to someone quite famous in our industry." My heart skipped a beat as I realized what was about to happen. Richard Blackstone was one of the most prominent venture capitalists in the country, and he had clearly recognized me from business publications and conference appearances. "Hannah Sullivan isn't it?" Richard continued, his voice carrying the authority that came with managing billions of dollars in investments. "CEO and founder of TaskFlow Technologies. I believe we met briefly at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference last year." The effect of his words was immediate and devastating. Every person within hearing distance went completely silent as they processed the implications of what Richard had just said. Cell phones appeared as guests began frantically searching Google for information about Hannah Sullivan and TaskFlow Technologies. Emma's face went from pale to green as the full scope of the catastrophe became clear. Not only had her secret about my identity been revealed, but my success had been announced to the entire reception in the most public way possible. "Wait," Derek said slowly, his voice filled with amazement and growing understanding. "Hannah Sullivan. The Hannah Sullivan who was on the cover of Forbes last month. The woman who built a $100 million company from scratch. That would be me," I confirmed, simply watching as Emma swayed slightly in her chair as if she might faint. Derek stared at me with wonder, his expression transforming, as he understood that the girl he had been searching for hadn't just survived her family's rejection, but had become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. "My God," Derek whispered, "you didn't just disappear, you became extraordinary." Around us, guests were excitedly sharing information from their Google searches, and I could hear fragments of conversation as people read articles about my company and personal story aloud to each other. "Says here she was homeless in San Francisco before starting her company. Net worth estimated at over $20 million. She's been featured in Time magazine and the Wall Street Journal." Emma buried her face in her hands as her perfect wedding reception transformed into a celebration of my success story. Everything she had worked for, every careful lie she had constructed, was crumbling around her as the truth emerged. Derek turned back to his wife with an expression of complete disgust. "You knew," Derek said, his voice filled with cold anger. "You knew exactly who Hannah was, what she had accomplished, and you let me go on believing she had simply vanished. You built our entire relationship on lying to me about the person I cared most about in the world. Derek, I love you." Emma sobbed, mascara streaming down her face in dark rivers. "I was trying to protect what we had. I knew that if you found her, you would choose her over me." "So you chose for me," Derek replied with bitter finality. "You manipulated me into giving up my search and settling for someone who would lie about something this fundamental." The reception had essentially stopped around us as word of my identity, and the family drama spread through the crowd like wildfire. I could see wedding guests calling friends and family members to share the incredible story unfolding before their eyes. Emma's parents had finally noticed the commotion and were pushing through the crowd toward our table, their faces showing alarm at seeing their daughter's public breakdown. "What's happening here?" Linda demanded as she reached us, her voice sharp with authority and concern. Derek turned toward my mother with fury I had never seen in the gentle boy I remembered from high school. What's happening, Derek said, his voice carrying across the reception hall, is that I just discovered my wife has been lying to me about her sister for 3 years. The sister you threw out of your house for being ugly. The sister who is now worth $20 million and was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. Linda's face went through the same series of expressions that Emma's had, settling on desperate damage control as she realized the public nature of this revelation. Now Linda began in her most reasonable voice. Family situations are always complicated. There are things you don't understand about Hannah's behavior that justified our decisions. The only thing I understand, Derek interrupted, is that you destroyed your own daughter's life out of cruelty, and your other daughter has been manipulating me based on those lies ever since. He turned back to Emma, who was still sobbing into her hands while her elaborate wedding dress absorbed her tears. "This marriage is over," Derek said with quiet finality. "I won't spend another day with someone who could be this deceptive about something this important." Emma looked up with desperate hope. "Derek, please, we can work through this. I'll do anything." "You can start," Derek said coldly, "by telling everyone here the truth about what your family did to Hannah 15 years ago." The reception hall had gone completely quiet as 300 guests waited to hear what Emma would say. Photographers and videographers originally hired to capture wedding memories were now documenting the most dramatic family confrontation most people had ever witnessed. Emma looked around at all the expectant faces, then back at Derek's unforgiving expression, and finally at me, standing calmly beside their table. "We made a mistake," Emma whispered, barely loud enough for people to hear. "Louder," Derek commanded. "Tell everyone what you did." Emma took a shuddering breath and raised her voice. "We told Hannah she wasn't good enough for college. We used her college fund to pay for my cosmetic surgery. We kicked her out of the house with $200 because we thought she was ugly and would never amount to anything." The silence that followed her confession was deafening. I could see shock, disgust, and sympathy playing across hundreds of faces as wedding guests processed the magnitude of the family's cruelty. Derek nodded grimly, then turned to address the crowd himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to know that Hannah Sullivan, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America, is Emma's sister. The sister her family threw away like garbage. The woman I've been searching for since the day she disappeared while my wife lied to me about knowing her." He turned back to Emma one final time. "I hope it was worth it," Derek said quietly, "because you lost everything for those lies." With that, Derek walked away from the head table, leaving Emma sobbing in her destroyed wedding dress, while 300 guests watched in stunned silence. I stood there for a moment, looking down at my sister as she cried, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. She had built her entire adult life around lies and manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences in the most public way possible. But I also felt something else: closure. The girl who had left this town broken and worthless had returned as a woman who commanded respect and admiration. The family who had discarded me had been forced to acknowledge their mistake in front of everyone they knew. Justice had been served, but not through revenge, through truth. In the aftermath of Derek's departure, the reception took on a surreal quality as wedding guests found themselves at what was essentially a party for a marriage that had just publicly ended. Some people quietly collected their gifts and slipped away, uncomfortable with the intimate family drama they had witnessed. Others lingered, drawn by morbid curiosity and the unprecedented nature of what they had experienced. Emma remained collapsed in her chair, her elaborate wedding dress spread around her like the deflated dreams it represented. Linda and Robert flanked her protectively, shooting hostile glances at me, as if I were somehow responsible for the destruction of their carefully constructed facade, rather than simply the person who had survived their cruelty. "Hannah," Linda said, approaching me with the same false sweetness she had used 15 years earlier. "I think you've caused enough drama for one evening. Perhaps it would be best if you left." I looked at my mother, this woman who had given birth to me, but had never truly seen me as a person worthy of love or respect, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. "You're right, Linda," I replied calmly. I should go, but before I do, I want you to understand something important. A small crowd of guests had gathered around us, drawn by the ongoing confrontation. I could see cell phones recording our interaction, documenting what would undoubtedly become a legendary story in their social circles. When you threw me out 15 years ago, you told me I would never amount to anything. You said I was too ugly, too stupid, and too worthless to deserve the investment of a college education. You took the money that was meant for my future and spent it on making Emma more beautiful, as if external appearance was the only thing that mattered in this world. Linda's face flushed red as I recounted her cruelty in front of her friends and neighbors. Robert shifted uncomfortably beside her, avoiding eye contact with the growing audience. What you didn't understand then, and what I suspect you still don't understand now, is that you did me the greatest favor of my life. Linda's expression shifted to confusion, as this wasn't the reaction she had expected. By rejecting me so completely, you forced me to discover my own worth, independent of your approval. You pushed me to develop strength I never knew I possessed. You taught me that family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about people who support your growth and celebrate your successes rather than tearing you down. I gestured toward the remnants of the wedding reception around us. Look at what your values created. Emma built her entire adult life around lies and manipulation because she learned from you that deception was acceptable if it got her what she wanted. She destroyed her own marriage tonight because she couldn't understand that real relationships are built on truth and trust. Emma looked up at me with tear-stained eyes, her perfect makeup ruined and her confidence completely shattered. For the first time since I had known her, she looked vulnerable and human, rather than calculating and cruel. I want you all to understand something. I continued addressing not just my family, but the gathered crowd of wedding guests who had witnessed this entire drama unfold. Success isn't about proving your worth to people who rejected you. Success is about building a life that reflects your values and contributes something meaningful to the world. I reached into my purse and pulled out a checkbook, quickly writing out a check for $50,000. Linda, this is the amount of my college fund that you stole to pay for Emma's plastic surgery. I'm giving it back to you not because I owe you anything, but because I want to close this chapter of my life completely. Linda stared at the check with obvious confusion and growing greed. $50,000 was clearly a significant sum for them, which told me everything I needed to know about how their life choices had worked out financially. I don't need your money anymore, I told her. I don't need your approval, your acknowledgement, or your love. I've built something beautiful from the ashes of your rejection, and that's a gift I can give myself. I turned to Emma, who was watching our interaction with desperate attention. Emma, I want you to understand that Derek didn't leave you because of me. He left you because you built your relationship on fundamental dishonesty. You had 3 years to tell him the truth about our family situation, and you chose deception every single time. Emma's face crumpled as she realized the accuracy of my assessment. But I also want you to know that I forgive you. I continued, surprised by the genuineness of my own words. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because holding on to anger about the past would diminish the beautiful life I've built for myself. You forgive us. Robert spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and disbelief. I forgive you for being exactly who you were, I clarified. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending we have a relationship we've never actually had. You made your choices 15 years ago, and I made mine. We're all living with the consequences of those decisions. I looked around the reception hall one final time, taking in the faces of people who had witnessed this extraordinary confrontation. Some looked amazed, others uncomfortable, but many seemed genuinely moved by what they had experienced. I hope tonight taught everyone something valuable about how we treat the people in our lives, I said to the gathered crowd. Success and happiness come from lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. They come from truth, not lies. They come from building others up rather than protecting ourselves through cruelty. As I prepared to leave, Derek appeared at my side, having returned to collect some personal items from the head table. His face was calmer now, though still marked by the emotional intensity of the evening. "Hannah," Derek said quietly, "I owe you an apology. If I had tried harder to find you, if I hadn't given up my search, maybe none of this would have happened." "Derek," I replied gently, "you have nothing to apologize for. You searched for me as long as you reasonably could. Emma made deliberate choices to deceive you, and that's not your responsibility." Derek nodded gratefully, then hesitated before speaking again. "Would you be open to staying in touch as friends, I mean? I'd love to hear about your journey and what you've built. You've become exactly the person I always believed you could be." I smiled at this kind man who had been manipulated into a marriage based on lies, but still had the grace to focus on rebuilding rather than revenge. "I'd like that," I told him honestly. As I walked toward the exit, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me back to this place. The scared 18-year-old who had left Dayton with $200 and a broken heart had returned as a confident woman who had built something meaningful from the pain of rejection. The most important lesson I had learned wasn't about business success or financial achievement. It was about the power of defining your own worth independent of other people's opinions. My family's rejection had hurt tremendously, but it had also forced me to develop an internal strength and self-respect that no one could take away. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation from Derek and a lovely woman named Jennifer, a teacher he had met through volunteer work at a literacy program. Their engagement photo showed two people who genuinely celebrated each other's qualities, rather than trying to possess or manipulate each other. Emma sent me a letter several months after her annulled marriage, apologizing for her deception and asking for guidance about starting over. I responded with kindness but maintained clear boundaries. Forgiveness was a gift I gave myself, but rebuilding trust required consistent, honest behavior over time. I established the Hannah Clark Foundation the following year, providing college scholarships specifically for young people from dysfunctional families who needed support to pursue higher education. The foundation's mission statement reflected the lesson I had learned through my own journey. Every person has inherent worth that can't be diminished by other people's inability to recognize it. The most beautiful part of my story wasn't the financial success or business recognition. It was the discovery that love and belonging come from building authentic relationships with people who see your value rather than seeking validation from those who choose blindness. Sometimes the family that rejects you isn't the family you were meant to have. Sometimes being forced to build your own life leads you to discover strengths and possibilities you never would have found within the limitations others tried to impose on you. My parents thought they were punishing me when they threw me away. Instead, they gave me the freedom to become exactly who I was meant to be. That's a gift I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's rejection actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when what seemed like the worst thing that could happen actually led you to something better. Please like this video if Hannah's journey inspired you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your own path, and share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's limitations define your possibilities.